Mary had asked us to talk about how organic research, or what's the need for organic research, and I guess I'll skip that because I feel like over the last 2 days we've heard it very well articulated why organic research is needed. We have unique questions and we're operating in a very unique environment. I'd say in organic grains though that we've probably seen the clearest example of this in the breeding work and selection work that's been done. Steve Jones, Steve Banziger, Pat Carr have all demonstrated unequivocally that you can't use data from conventional variety trials to then inform your choices of varieties for organic systems, and Molly has just hit that nail on the head as well. So that work has definitely benefited the organic industry directly and then indirectly benefited consumers. And I have to figure this out. Next. All right. Well, and those consumers are looking for organic food that they feel is healthy and protects the environment, is produced sustainably. There's also now an interest among consumers to find food that's local organic food. And this is driven by their desire to connect with their food source and to support local farmers and support the local economy. Here we have a headline from the New York Times from a couple of years ago talking about the demand for bread that's been produced from wheat that's grown locally or milled locally. In Maine and Vermont, where we're working, farmers and, millers and bakers just haven't had, they haven't been able to source enough locally produced grains. There's just not enough to supply that demand. And that actually represents real economic opportunity for farmers in our area. And so this project is driven directly by consumers, and so benefits consumers directly. If they didn't have that demand for locally produced wheat, I'm the first to admit that there's really no reason to be doing that kind of research in Maine. I've worked in Washington and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania. Maine is not poised to be the next top producer of organic grains in the nation. Maybe Vermont is, but I don't know. But, but the whole equation is different. The question now is not whether we can compete with Kansas or Nebraska. It's whether we can supply that local demand. And so that's what our project is looking at. And I guess I would just also like to say that that this demand is really revitalizing agriculture in areas like Maine. Maine really represents the small-scale agriculture, the ag that operates outside of the commodity market. I think Ann Schwartz talked about this in the western part of Washington, and she illustrated that really nicely. There's just a huge amount of optimism with this sort of demand for local, that we can have really vital and healthy agriculture in rural areas like ours that are small, but they're located to large urban areas where people are looking to buy. So that's a really important point. That demand also extends then to meat products, dairy, eggs, and those producers are looking for locally produced organic grains as well. So the demand for local organic wheat has created an economic opportunity. This is a collaborator of Heather's, Brent Beidler, and he's an organic dairy farmer. But it's created that opportunity, but it's also created a whole new suite of research and outreach needs that haven't been necessarily addressed by organic research before this. So in response to that demand and in response to that need, Heather and I at the University of Maine and the University of Vermont and 8 of our colleagues in various disciplines created a project that was funded by the OREI program, and it included in our in its design farmers, millers, and bakers are key stakeholders. And I'll just go through the project components. We basically have 3 in terms of we're looking at research that's needed in our area, networking and outreach, and developing tools for farmers. So the research was really, the topics were identified by our stakeholders. The first two are ones that are common to organic grain research, I think, across the nation and elsewhere. For winter wheat, the top limiting factor is fertility, how to produce grain that meets that, reaches the protein level, 12% or so, to make it suitable for bread use. For spring wheat, our key limitation is weed management. And then in our region, because we're a more humid region than out in the plains, we actually are dealing with fusarium, a disease that I'll talk about in a little bit. So that's a question unique to trying to grow wheat in our area. As well, we haven't had variety evaluations in our area at all, and we don't know which do well in terms of yield and quality and taste. And then we're also looking at profitability and risk. Does it make sense for our farmers, given our growing conditions, to try to produce wheat and add it to their enterprise? I'll go through a couple of these trials. So this work in weed management was actually started with a previous ORI grant that Chris Reber-Horton got when he was at Maine. And it's was done by my husband, Eric Gallant, in barley. And he and his graduate student, Lauren Kolb, have then extended it also to wheat. Basically, the reason for this is that in organic cereals, right now, the primary means of controlling weeds in a reactive manner is with the tine harrow or blind cultivation. And that can work really well if all of the stars are aligned, you've got the right soil moisture, the crop is at the right stage, the weeds are small. But if you don't have all of those conditions, you can put yourself at a lot of risk for impacts from weeds. And so Eric, we had spent a sabbatical year in Denmark, and Eric got some ideas from Northern European grain growers. One is looking at trying to increase the competitive ability of the crop by narrowing up the rows, and this is based on some work by Jake Weiner at the University of Copenhagen. By narrowing the rows, you're increasing the ability of the crop to compete directly with weeds instead of just itself when you're in a little bit wider rows. The other strategy takes a completely different tact, and this is looking at trying to improve mechanical weed control by widening the rows, and that allows for going through with a hoe at different times of the season. And this is a hoe at Per Gruppe's farm north of Copenhagen, and he uses this system, and they've been using it in Denmark, particularly where they have issues with perennial weeds. And you can go in at multiple times of the year. You're not as, your window of opportunity is just so much broader, let's say. And so what they found in barley and wheat, and just quick sum, is that when you don't have weed pressure, then these systems, in comparison to a standard system, there's not that much of an advantage, and they cost more. But if you do have weed pressure, they both, through their different techniques, actually improve weed management, have equal yields. The wide row system is not as expensive. You might think it would be, but in terms of operating costs, it's cheaper because to do the narrow rows, you're increasing your seeding density, and seed is expensive. And then last year in wheat, we found that with the wide row system and the hoeing, we had actually higher protein levels, and something that I'd like to look at a little bit further. Fertility management for winter wheat, like I said, the issue is getting grain protein levels, and with a winter wheat crop, it's hard because if you're putting on your facility source in the fall before planting, you can lose some over the winter. It's hard to supply enough nitrogen to get the protein that you want. So we're looking at top dressing and we're looking at different sources: Chilean nitrate, dehydrated chicken manure. With the chicken manure being an organic source, there can be issues of it mineralizing quickly enough. So we thought, well, let's combine it with a host system and see if we can release a little bit more of that nitrogen. And then we're also looking at different times of application because nitrogen availability, the timing of availability can really influence protein levels, not just the amount. Tillering, flag leaf, and boot stages were what we used. And After 1 year of research, we had very similar results. Heather and I are doing this together in Vermont and Maine, 2 different sites. And basically, those sources both worked to increase protein levels. The Chilean was more effective. Hoeing didn't do anything. It's like, shucks. And the later timings of application were more effective as well. So these are just 2 examples where I feel like we're producing some real tools that farmers can use to address some of their production problems. I mentioned Fusarium head blight. So plants are susceptible to this disease during flowering, especially when there's wet conditions. It's wet in the Northeast in June, and so we've had an issue with this. One of our millers has actually says he has about 25% rejection rate due to contamination with a mycotoxin that's produced by the fungus. And so we're looking at, Heather is looking at different ways that the inoculum comes in. Is it mostly soil-borne, or is it coming in through drift, through the wind? Also, we're, of course, looking at different varieties, which ones are more or less susceptible. And then there's a graduate student looking at underseeding of clover as a way to try to avoid inoculum to getting up to the flower. And then, of course, we're doing variety evaluations. And this is, I usually start with this because in a grower group, growers love variety evaluations. And I never thought I would be doing this. I'm not trained to do this, really, but it has such good I don't know, interest and goodwill, and it's very, very much needed. And so we've been looking at commercially available varieties, thinking that we need to find ones that, if something is promising, we want it immediately available for growers to use. We've tested over 25 varieties of both winter and spring wheat, looking at yield, agronomic components, as well as then grain quality, and then we'll be looking at taste as well. And we've been working with some bakers to do some preliminary evaluations right now. All right, so that's the research component. Our networking and outreach component. So because it's a local project and because it's so new, some of what we felt was really important was to foster the communication between all the key players. So not just farmers and researchers, but farmers and bakers and millers and researchers, and all of that, creating that network. And we're doing that through grower meetings, or I guess we would call them grower, miller, and baker meetings. Workshops, field days, a couple targeted sort of strategic meetings. We had one last year to talk about what the quality parameters would be for our region for bread, flour. And, but then also not just looking within our group, but bringing in experts from the outside, and then going outside our area to where there have been really successfully built local bread wheat systems in Quebec and Denmark. Here's just a slide from last January. This is Jim Amaral. He's the founder and owner of Borealis Bread. He's a baker, and he has been a key stakeholder or partner in this project. And he did this session on taking some of the wheat that we'd grown in our variety trials, doing a baking test, talking about why some baked well and others didn't. Here he's giving Raz Caldwell, who is one of our top organic dairy and beef farmers, 2 doughs that he had just made. He whipped up while he was talking, trying to let him see what the differences were in terms of quality characteristics, how that played out in the dough. We had a taste test with that. These are some shots from when we went up to Quebec 2 falls ago and looked at their local bread wheat system, visited a farm, a mill, a bakery, and folks on that trip really brought back some, one miller brought back some ideas on how to organize his mill, because the scale was appropriate to his situation. Farmers brought back ideas about trying to harvest earlier and how to protect grain quality. Last fall, we went to Denmark and toured around for 5 days. And here we are actually back at Per Gruppe's farm, and where we had seen the hoe before. This trip really brought home, I think, for everyone. It was surprising because I organized the trip and I was looking for a lot of agronomic issues that we could, learn from. But it was interesting that most people brought back marketing ideas and how to tell your story really well. And there's a couple of mills who excel at this. And Heather just actually invited and had one of the millers from that trip visit for the grain conference she just hosted last week. And so not only did these trips provide us with some ideas that we hope will play out over the years, but it's also provided us with these key linkages. Our pathologist has been in contact with the pathologist there now. A farmer in Maine has been contacted or has been in connection with farmers that he met there. So I think that will play out in the future. Okay. And we're also producing videos and information that's available on our website. And the last objective is tools for farmers, and that will be our website, interactive enterprise budgets, and in the end, a production guide. So I'd like to draw on this example and on the others that I talked about to just address some of the questions that Mary had in terms of why involve stakeholders. The first one I heard a lot is to assure relevance of the projects, and we've heard that in a number of the talks already. So in New York, the involvement of expert farmers as partners is making sure to hone in on the important questions and also to get the important questions and also the treatments that might be of use to farmers, actually. Another is to bring together the needs and possibilities, and the example that I would use here is from work down in North Carolina that Chris Weber-Horton is leading up the farmer-driven breeding for organic, and he tells a story about getting together some farmers and breeders in this at a meeting, and the farmers talking about the need, their concerns about contamination with GMO crops, and the breeders saying, oh, I didn't realize that. Well, I have a solution for that. In popcorn we use a crossing barrier, and that would solve that problem. And it was just a question of bringing together the people with the needs and bringing together the person who knew some possibilities to solve that need. Also, stakeholders really enhance our credibility. Here we have Rick Herzbergen, who's an extension educator in Maine, and he can talk all he wants, and he's respected well. But when Jeff Bragg, the organic dairy farmer, says it, people listen, and so that, they can help us in our outreach and reaching other farmers. They can help us figure out the best way to reach farmers, and I guess. Also, they can help us figure out sort of how to navigate the politics that might be out there in the farming community. As well, from a personal example, one of my key partners in this, he wasn't originally in our stakeholder group, and when I went to a meeting to present our project and talk about this exciting possibilities, and it's the first time that I had talked about it, first time I'd been in this group, he totally chewed me out and just said, university has nothing to offer organic. You're always looking at the wrong things. Anyway, I was like, whoa. And I didn't cry. My graduate student cried, but I didn't cry. And the next week, I called him up and said, do you want to be on our advisory board? And I couldn't believe it, but he said yes. And he has been our most devoted member, I'd say. He's always contacting me to find out what's going on. He has helped promote the project a lot. And so I think the point here is that, yes, we need stakeholder involvement in these projects, but these projects foster stakeholder development as well, and they can be used to build on future communication and all of that. I'm getting close to my time, I realize. I'm just going to do a few more key points. We benefit directly from the knowledge that others bring. So I was also asked to touch on some of the key issues that remain, and weeds and fertility and disease, yes, I won't do that anymore. Reducing tillage is one that is coming up for organic grains. We rely a lot on tillage for weed management. How can we get away from that? There's some neat programs, projects. Sig Snap in Michigan is looking at perennial wheat. Steve Jones has really pioneered that. This is using the roller crimper in grain production. Maryland is doing that. This is a photo from Michelle Cavagelli. I know in North Carolina they are, in Nebraska looking at this. We also need to look at nutrient management. When we're relying a lot on manures, we can end up with phosphorus issues. How can we use legumes to supply more nitrogen? How can we fit them into short season systems like ours in the north? And then one I think is really important to sort of to bring out is seed-borne diseases in organic. What we're seeing smut, the loose smut in some of the varieties we're getting, not just from farm-safe seed, but also from commercial sources. And if that's not, right now, the way to deal with that is to get the seed to a conventional farm, have it treated, grown out, and then bring it back in organic, and that's not sustainable, really. In Europe, they're facing common bunt. This is Anders Borgen in Denmark, who's done a lot of work at looking at different seed treatments and selecting varieties for that. And so I just have one last slide. I guess I just want to say that the project has really, I'm surprised at the amount of excitement and sort of media attention that we've gotten from this. And Heather and I are actually there was somebody did our portraits in sprouted wheat, of all things. But from the conversations that I've had with farmers and millers and bakers and consumers, they're just really impressed and excited that the USDA is supporting organic and supporting their vision for developing vital local food systems. So, thank you.